Okay, so here we're going to have a quick overview of the Photoshop interface, and basically what we're going to do is have a whistle stop tour from the left here across the top in the menus to the right, and just have a look at all the different features that you'll see when you first open up Photoshop, and just talk about the tools that you'll really need to focus on as you begin working on a project. Okay, so if we come across the left hand side here, we can see we have the toolbar in Photoshop, okay, and it's split into several distinct sections. Okay, so if we look at the top sections here, we have selection tools. So these are for selecting objects in Photoshop, for selecting areas such as the rectangular marquee tool that we have here, or the magic wand tool, and you would use those for selecting, moving, cutting, copying and pasting elements within an image or within the layers of your Photoshop document. If we come down to the next section here, and you can see these dark lines highlight those, then we have the painting tools. So we have the retouching tools, the painting tools, and also things such as the eraser tool. Okay, so these are the classic tools you would use in Photoshop for retouching a photograph or for painting in Photoshop from scratch. Then if we come down a little further, we have the vector-based tools. Okay, so these are things such as the pen tool, which you can see I've got switched to a different tool here, the text tool, and then the direct selection tool and the shape tools, okay, which we can see here. And if we click and hold down, we can see we can create different shapes such as ellipses, rectangles, so on and so forth. And if you have a look at the different tools in the Photoshop toolbar on the left hand side here, wherever you see a little arrow on the bottom right of that tool, it means that you can click and hold on it and select a different version of that tool. So either the lasso tool, the polygonal lasso tool here, for example. And if we come down, we have the paintbrush tool, the pencil tool. So the other drawing tools are hidden underneath that initial tool that we see on the toolbar. Okay, and if we come down to the very bottom here, we have the hand tool, the zoom tool, and also the foreground and background color options here as well, which is where we display the foreground and background color. One thing you'll come across from time to time is the need to change back to the default, so to black and white. So we can click on this tiny little button here, and that will change our foreground to black and our background to white. And we can also switch them round by pressing this button here. So let's select the text tool here just as an example to demonstrate our next set of tools. So if we come up to the top, just below the menus, you'll see the options toolbar. Okay, so basically this is now showing the options that we have for our text tool. Okay, and whenever we select a different tool, such as the move tool, you can see we get a different set of options. So for instance, with the move tool, when we have different layers selected, we can do things like align them to one another. We can transform them and scale them. So that's the kinds of options that we have up here. Okay, then if we have the selection tool, we can do different types of selections, adding and removing from selections. We can create selections that are a fixed ratio, for instance. And so you can see the options toolbar kind of gives us those options for that particular tool. So these two sections in the Photoshop interface are interchangeable, the toolbar and the toolbar options that we have up here. Then if we come up to the top, we have some of the classic menus you see in every application, things like the file menu, the edit menu, and we have some of the same features that you'll see in a text editor, such as edit, copy, edit, paste. They're grayed out at the moment because we don't have a file open, but when we do, we'll be able to copy and paste elements. Then we have the classic file open options, file save, save as, if we want to version our Photoshop documents, and then some other different options that we would use from time to time, such as save for web. If we're saving out something, we want to crunch it down for the web as a JPEG or a GIF file, we would use that. So we have some other options here as well that are worth paying attention to. We have things like image size, so we can adjust the size of our image under the image menu, and then we'll skip over the layers menu. A lot of the time you will come down to the layers panel on the right hand side here, because things are a bit more visual and a bit easier to navigate. The layers menu is not one I use a lot. We have the type menu, and again with the type menu, a lot of those type options are in the options toolbar. So the type menu is not one that I come to a lot to do work in Photoshop. Underneath, if we flip to the filter menu, we have some of the effects and filters that we can use in Photoshop. And that's a menu I use a reasonable amount to add different noise filters to pixelate layers if I'm adding an effect. And also things like lens correction as well. If you're using a camera, like a fisheye lens on a camera, then sometimes you might want to correct that to remove some of the distortion from an image. Okay. If we come across now to the view menu, we'll see some zoom in and zoom out options here. Again, with those options, we'll use a lot of shortcuts. It's just a lot quicker to work in Photoshop as you get used to the shortcuts. So we use things like Command and plus and minus on the Mac, or Control and plus and minus on the PC, depending on which platform you're working on. And also Importantly, the view at 100%, so we can see the actual quality of our images, and we'll talk a bit about that as we move through different projects. And then under the window menu, this is a menu I come to a reasonable amount, we have all the panels that we need to access in Photoshop here. Okay. Now, one of the things that does happen from time to time with the panels is that you can rearrange your panels in your workspace and your layout in Photoshop. So if we come across the right hand side, before we get into talking about the panels themselves, we can drag these around and reorder them, okay, which is handy. Sometimes you might not need the pass panel, so you close it up, and sometimes you might not need to use channels, so you'll close it up, and so you're reorganizing those depending upon what you want to do. Okay, and sometimes you'll think, where did I put the layers panel? Now we can go to window and layers and bring the layers panel back up, but if you've made a lot of changes and you've actually moved a lot of things around, then what you might want to do is actually reset all the panel locations. And this is one of the most useful features in Photoshop, just to orientate yourself when you're starting out, and that is the window workspace reset essentials. Okay, so we have the essentials view set up here as our workspace, and we can reset that. I'll put everything back in the right spot, and it's really useful when you're following along with the tutorial here too, because I will be keeping the default layout quite a lot, or adding and removing to it as we go along, and jumping back to the default essentials workspace will be really useful as we kind of go on. Okay, so really the next step to go through is either to create a new file in Photoshop or to open a file. So we're going to create a new one. So if we just go to File and New, okay, this is the next step. So we have some options here for our different files. I'm just going to jump this to RGB. We're going to be working for screen in this particular exercise, so we're going to stick with RGB color. If we were working for a print document, then we might want to use CMYK if we're working on a standard CMYK printer. Okay, so here we have a custom size setup that I was working on previously, but if you come to the preset options here, you can see that we've got some default sizes that we can work with, such as US paper, international paper, so that would be European paper sizes, and then sizes for the web and for film and video. Okay, we're going to go for some web sizes here. Okay, now just to put this into context, the size here in pixels for the web is basically about half of full HD, a little bit less than half of full HD. So full HD is 1920 by 1080, and this is 800 by 600. So it's just a little bit less than half the size of HD. Okay, so we're going to create an image size that's 1024 by 768. Now, if you're making something for the web, for a web page, then 1024 by 768 is normally a good size to kind of start with as you set out to create images. Okay, if we click OK here, we can name our file here, or we can just name it when we save it. So we'll click OK, and then you'll see that we have a transparent background here. That's what the checkerboard means. And I'll just show you the other option that we have here. So if we go to File, New, the background contents here was set to transparent, or we can set it to white or a different background color here by selecting the background color. Okay, so we'll just make a new document the same size, click OK, and it's now a white document. Okay, so you can see we've got a locked background layer in this file, and in this file with a transparency we have an unlocked background layer. So that's the first little look at our layers panel here. Okay, so just to get things started here, we'll close this Untitled 1 project. Okay, and we are going to grab the type tool. Okay, and we're going to just type in a bit of area type just to show how things can get started. So we'll click and hold and drag out a text box. Okay, and dragging out a text box means the text is going to wrap within that, and we'll just type in something, and this has come out quite small. You can see it just down here, so we'll grab that and just pump the size up a little bit, and you can see we've typed in hello world. And that's a quick overview of the Photoshop interface. And we're just going to finish up by going to File and Save. And we're going to save this right onto the desktop. Okay, and we'll call this Hello World. And we'll just click OK here. And now we're ready to move on and start working in Photoshop.